So before we get into the actual seeing of how this stuff looks in CRM, I would just take a step back and just take a look at GDPR a little bit. We're not going to go all the way through GDPR, that's a whole another ball game, but there's a few bits of GDPR that are relevant to this tool, so it's nice to just take a step back and see why we're doing what we're doing and how it works. So one of the main things that we're trying to fix at this point is implementing how the lawful basis for processing works. So direct marketing is an example of how you process your data. And in order to process that data, you need to have a lawful way in which you're doing it. One of the ways is consent, and there is other ways of doing it, which we'll get onto. But consent is this big one, and it's the one that takes a little while to talk through. So there is a definition of consent, which you can see on the screen now. I won't read it all through it, but it's an interesting definition of how it is. And then we have now what is defined as all the different types of consent. These things all now need to exist, and you can't just have a blanket consent of I consent to everything, thank you. So there's all sorts. So you've got unbundled, you've got active opt-in, granular, named, documented, easy to withdraw, and known balance. I'm not going to spend the whole time going through it on this video. We all want to see what it's like within CRM, but these slides are all here for you to have a reference point of, and if you want to watch them, you can always pause the video and have a quick read and see what you think of them. So as well as consent, there's a couple of other options available. So we have legitimate interests, legal obligation, necessary for the vital interests of the subject, fulfillment of a contract, and necessary for performance of a task in public interest. Again, not going to go through them all, but these are all the things that you can apply these within CRM. If you're looking at the theory of GDPR, then that's probably a place to start and just go on Google, and there's a couple of help methods that we'll have on our website about it all. But this is the sort of thing that we will be looking at implementing within the CRM system relatively easily. But basically the problem we have, which is where the birth of Provenance comes from, is that all this information on the left hand side of the screen that you can see somehow, according to Dynamics, has to fall down to those small amount of fields that rolls up or rolls down to allow and do not allow. And there's just so much information there that it becomes impossible really to stay fully GDPR compliant and just use those fields that exist in the system. So now we're actually in a CRM system. These are the bits we care about. These are the bits we want to see, and we want to see how it works within the system. So the core of consent is the consent statement. And this is the thing that somebody agrees to or is read out to them, or in one way or another they say, yes, I consent to this or I consent to that. So Provenance allows you to set all this up yourself. So within settings and then into consent statements, you just have a list of consent statements, nice and easy. So there's a few examples in this example system, but you can have as many as you want. And if you start editing your consent statements over time, then you can sort of deactivate these and make new ones and just keep a historical record of how you're changing your consent statements and that sort of stuff. So a good example, we've got a nice simple newsletter only consent statement. So this is somebody that's very explicitly been on our website or done something somewhere to say, I would like to have any information on new releases from you. So the consent statement was as simple as, if you would like to receive news on data8's newest releases, then please tick this box. So you can see that that was a tick box on a website somewhere, and it's just a way of linking it all together. This could be a body of text that an agent on a call reads out, or it could be an addendum at the bottom of an email to say consenting to more things. These are the sort of things that's available to you. The one extra thing that's worth showing at this point is a thing that didn't have a word, so we made a word up, so let's hope we see that as a real word soon, which is a word called consentable. So when you have the consent statement, you are able to consent into certain things, so it's a piece of consent. So this new releases is nice and simple. You opt into new releases, so you therefore have the new releases consentable. That's how this is designed to work. So you have this little object that will sit within the lead or within the contact that helps you then build up this picture of what they're allowed to do. It does link through to these fields, so that do not allow emails, do not allow bulk mails, those sorts of things. So if those fields are are of interest to you and you still use them in your system, then when you apply these consentables, we recalculate these fields if you are allowed them, just so those fields don't become redundant, although we think over time they may become redundant and there's better ways to do these things. So now we have these consent statements and we have these consentables. We want to make the process of applying a consent statement and therefore consentables to a subject, so a person or a lead, a little bit easier. So we do that, it's nice and easy. We've made it nice and easy for a user. So I'm just going to go and take a look at a lead in our system. And we will do Mr. GDPR, given in this case, that wonderful name. And what we can see, so up here, I'm system administrator in this system, so that's why I have quite a lot of stuff on the ribbon. But what I've got under my ellipsis is a consent. Nice and easy, a single click away. So I can press on a consent, which gives me a pop-up box. A lot of it is pre-filled out for you already, so you don't need to make too much effort. The idea of this is to help with your salespeople or your call center agents or your day-to-day users that are going to do this a number of times. We'd like to make the process as quick as possible because people don't want to take extra hours in their day to do their normal job. So if you can make it nice and quick, then you become compliant with GDPR without adding too much time and effort into their day-to-day usage. So the point of this is that we get a consent given. What was the statement that was read out? So in this case, I could give them the new releases consent statement. When, so that gets pre-filled for me. How, so it's a phone call with a link. That could be a link to a saved file on your server. It could be a link to an attachment. It could be all sorts of things. And finally, consented lead. That again is pre-filled out because of where you came from. And I just save that. It's worth mentioning at this point that these are just entities within the system. So if you've got website integrations and those sorts of things, then all this stuff is easy to do through the API if you've got your developers or whoever's doing those things. So this is not just a user interface thing, this is fully behind the scenes managed. So you don't need to go through this process if people are signing up through your website. You could automate that if you wanted to. So that consent record's been made. And I can go back and look at my Mr. GDPR given. And if I just take a look down, what we'll see in consents is a historical picture of their consent now. So we don't just have a snapshot as they are right now at this point. We now actually have a full picture of what they did have and when they got it and if they withdrew it. And you can just start building this picture. And because you get these things, you can even start seeing patterns when people are opting out. So are you sending things too often? Do you need to, have you caused people to want to remove themselves? Those sorts of things are able to be looked at as well, which is often quite interesting. So the example you see here is this one guy now has a single piece of consent which was given, and that's where it started as a phone call. Now if I just take a look at a different record, if we go for this one, what we can see is a bit more of a picture here. So you can now see historically that we have a bit more of a picture. So on the 1st of the 1st, he consented to all phone calls, but then he actually withdrew his consent for all those phone calls. So maybe he decided to change his mind. He did the first one over email. Over phone call, but then maybe he realised that he didn't want that anymore, so actually he sent an email in the next day and said, please withdraw my consent. So that's how he did that. But then a phone call later on actually meant he did consent into just all emails this time. So one of the new things within GDPR is you need to be very much more specific about method of communication. So yeah, your emails or your phone calls. So he doesn't mind having emails, but he doesn't want phone calls. So it just helps you understand a picture of this person and how and when they've used the system and how they've connected with us and said yes you can or no you can't. So now we have all this consent, we need to use it, we need to apply it, we need to, we've made all the effort to be compliant, so we might as well continue to do that and only market to people essentially that we're allowed to market to. And the core of most marketing at this point is marketing lists. So we've integrated this heavily with marketing lists. So that's where we will take a look at now. So I'm just going to go and take a look at a nice, easy marketing list. And in Blue Peter fashion, I've got one I made earlier, which is nice and easy. It is a static list of leads. Now, the difference between static and dynamic raises some good questions here. So dynamic lists are obviously better because the problem you may have is someone will consent to something on the 1st of January, and then middle of the year they may then withdraw their consent, but you add them in their list at the 1st of January, so they're still in your marketing list. So a dynamic list is better because through the usage of that advanced finds, you could find out somebody that has a specific consent or consentable, as we use it now. And we can then apply that. So with dynamics, you'd apply it in real time. So if they've then withdrawn their consent, then they wouldn't be in that list anymore. If it's static, it's a bit more difficult. You need to try and be clever and remove people out. But that's long-winded. People might forget about it. There's all sorts of places where that could go wrong. So this tool really comes into play. It's strongest, I think, within a static marketing list. So early on we spoke about consentables and how we use them. Now they are hierarchical. So you have the monthly newsletter releases, actually has a parent which is all marketing emails. So if somebody's consenting to all, they can get everything. So the point of this, what you need to do is start thinking, what is the lowest level of consent needed for these things? So a monthly newsletter marketing list is quite easy, that your lowest level of consent would be the monthly newsletter consent. For you to go higher than that, so you've got monthly newsletter, you then have your all marketing emails, and however your structure works, it's all sort of crazy tree structures, but for the sake of this video, we'll keep it nice and simple. So I need to apply this to this marketing list and then decide where I'm going to use it. So I've got a pre-made one here that's just got 4 leads that were added a while ago. And I've got a data processing grounds record now. So this is the new thing, this is what we've added in, and this is linked to a marketing list. So if I click on it to open it, what we now see is that we can now see that my processing grounds, this is consent. If you think back to the very start when I had the slide deck on the drop-down box, there's all those different options you've got. So your interest, your public interest, your legal obligation. So you decide on what grounds you're processing this under. And if you're doing consent, if you're doing consent, what is the consentable? So this is what I was saying, that because this is a monthly newsletter, the minimum consentable you need would be monthly newsletter. So we apply that. So we can say that for this marketing list, someone needs to have the monthly newsletter consentable and a bit of a description that's there. Bear with me on this. These take a little bit of time, and we can happily go through these things and explain them in a bit more detail, but this is hopefully just a quick once over to see how we can use it. So now it's applied, there's no difference, nothing looks any different, but I'm logged in as me, so I'm a system administrator, and generally I'm not going to market as me, or I'm not going to do any sort of marketing management outside of my account. But we have a marketing automation tool, and generally they seem to use their own users, and that's how they sort of work on through. Or alternatively, if your marketing team themselves are handling it, you might want to be a bit more structured them and say that they need to make sure they're enforcing these things, because they're the ones that are going to be sort of sending their stuff out. So if I just jump into a second copy of CRM, so this is the exact same CRM. The difference is I'm now logged in as a marketing automation user rather than me. And I will go to the exact same marketing list. And what we can see here is that as far as this user is concerned, there's only one person in this list here. So if I change those two, you can see there's 4 there, and only 1 there, but that's the exact same marketing list. So what that's doing in real time is that is based because we know this user has to abide and has to abide by all the consent rules that's in the system. It looks as if those people that aren't consented in are not even in the list. So if we just take a look and we know that one person that's in there, for example, so Mr. GDPR given is not in there at the moment. So what we'll do, if we just jump onto him, and we give him some consent, and we'll pretend that he already had the consent. But we'll prove the hierarchy at this point. So what we'll do is we'll go for the highest level. So something's happened and he's now decided, yeah, okay, I'm fine. I'm happy to receive all marketing emails. That's fine. So I just save and close that. We can now see in the history that we've built up this picture again, a bit more information about him. So we've got the one we gave earlier and now the one we've just given now. And then if I go back to this one and refresh it, he's now there. So that in real time has assessed that in a static list. So you don't have to worry about who is in the list and who isn't in the list. So if you're using your marketing automation and you set your marketing automation user to have to abide by these rules and do the filters, which is easily configurable. I won't go into it in this video, but it's a simple drop-down list on a user. Then it's a fail-safe. It means that no matter what, as far as this user is concerned, that person doesn't exist in the system. And I think that's a real benefit to having confidence in your system and knowing that you can't accidentally email people you shouldn't be emailing. So the next bit we're talking about is the right to erasure. So again, I'll just jump back into a couple of slides just for a bit more GDPR theory on the exact part that we're talking about here. And this one is the new rights that people had within GDPR. So pre-GDPR, it's easy to say, through sort of your Data Protection Act and all those sorts of things, you had all sorts of different rights. But there's been some more introduced and expanded upon within GDPR. And one of them we're going to focus on a bit more. So the three new ones, you've got the right to data portability, which means you've got the right to take your data out and let other people use it as and required. You've got the right to object, so you can say you don't want to do certain things. But the key one to us that we really try and fix is the right to erasure, or the right to be forgotten, as it's called in some places. So what we see is this description here, which is individuals have the right to have personal data erased, also the right to be forgotten, and it does only apply in certain circumstances. So what does that mean for a sort of a CRM system, and where do we go? So if somebody comes to you with your system and they says that I'd like to invoke my right to erasure, it can cause problems. It might be a lead that you met at a sort of maybe a marketing convention that you scanned or something like that, and you're weekly doing reports on how those leads are progressing through your system. But one of those people invokes their right to erasure. So you've gone from week 1 on your Monday to having 100 leads to week 2 on the Monday to having 99 leads. It's not been disqualified, it's not been followed through a sales cycle. So where's that lead gone? So it just dwindles, it goes, and your reports can start getting consistent. And also if you're using sort of maybe invoicing and orders and all that sort of procedure within a CRM system, that actually trying to keep all that data there without and staying compliant, so being able to do their erasure request, causes problems. The official recommendation that we've seen, that there's a big white paper that we've got linked to on our blog, is the right to erasure can be fulfilled within the CRM system by deleting. So we had a lead that's just received this email, basically somebody saying please erase him from your system. So you press the delete button, but that causes so many problems. Like I say, you delete all the related data, your historical reports could become out of date, or if you unlink them, so you keep your invoices in your system but you unlink them, then you've lost any relative links. You don't know who made them, and even just to try and keep track of this just becomes problematic. And a big one is, what if they come back? Do you want to keep their invoices? Do you want to reassign their orders back to that person again? And what if you bought that data, or if you imported that data from a different list? They might not have explicitly opted back in again, but then you're going to overrule their erasure request and then contact them again and cause yourself a whole world of problems. So you want to stop them going back in again unless they're supposed to be in there. And if they are supposed to be in there, then you'd like to ideally have all these links back through to keep a picture of them of where they came from. So actually Putting this in the system is nice and easy. We've set it up as for a couple of demos here so we can show it and see in the system. So I'm going to take a look at a lead, for example. And I'm going to go to dupe1, this wonderfully named lead that's in the system. Copy that for later. So this person has invoked their right to erasure. They don't want to be in the system anymore, but we would like them to be in there, or we would like the minimal to be in there to keep this picture of them. So GDPR states that it's personal identifiable information, and they've give out what they class as identifiable information. So using that, we can decide what bits of information are important to us, what bits of information we're not allowed to keep through compliance, and what bits of information we want to keep in an encrypted way to reuse later on. So I'll get onto that shortly. So the nice easy way of doing this now for a start is if I now decide to let him use his right to erasure, I can go to disqualify and I've got a GDPR erasure option here. So I just press that. Nice and easy. This person's now been GDPR erased and it's now a disqualified lead. If I just refresh the screen just so it can be fully updated on itself, what you'll see now is that the lead exists in the system with no way of knowing who this person was. So there is no name, there is no job title, there is nothing of interest, there is a topic still, but I determine that that is not identifiable information. The post is gone, any related activities, all these things have all gone, but any related stuff is still there. Now, one of the things we do in this system is you can configure it to use a thing called hashes. So what this means is that you can take a piece of information, you can do a one-way hash of it, so it becomes a non-human readable string of text that nothing can really be done with it. And it's one way. So you go from a nice, easy to read email address to this 150 character string that nobody can read, and it's impossible to go back the other way. But if you get that same piece of information from the start, what you can actually do is then recreate a secondary string and use all things like your duplicate detection. So the reason I copy and pasted that email before is that I've got the system configured to do that on email addresses. So I have a new lead, put a new name in again. I will paste their email address in. And admin one is a duplicate. So if you're seeing these yellow things for the first time, this is our sister product that's called Duplicare. We've got all sorts of videos on that. I'm sure there's links in the videos to them as well. So I'm using that at this point because they complement each other very well. But out of the box, you could use all your standard duplicate detection rules if you wanted to. So what that's done is that's taken this email address, it's encrypted it the same one way, and it's managed to find a match without the box with duplicate detection rules. So when I press save on that, I get a duplicate, but the duplicate I get is actually this disqualified GDPR erased lead. So I know this is a person re-engaging with me. So what I can decide to do actually is resurrect that old lead. So again, use duplicate at this point. I can now do a merge. This is the ghost merge that we use in Duplicare. That's not actually performing a merge. I can take all the data. So now I've got these new bits of data that were never there. I've got the email address, a bit more information, and I can just set the status on it. Where is the status? So I can now merge that record. So that's now redirected me back. So this is now the existing record that was now erased and now has all its data back in it again. Any links that were in there are still in there. And we just kept compliant. What you could do on a data import of a list is if you find that rule is fired, then don't make the record. That's how you stay safe. Just to show you the configuration very quickly, we shan't go through it in too much detail. It's nice and easy. So the lead we saw here, basically with every field gives you one of three options. What we see. So the first thing we can see is we delete posts. So when you make a post, you see when you make a lead, you have a post on the thing that says Matt Beard created this lead. The name would be in the post, so even if you invoked your erasure, the post will still be there, so you may want to get rid of your post, you may not. That depends on how you want to run your system. And down here we have each field. So for each field, three options Option 1, do nothing, leave it, don't care, it's not identifiable. Option 2, clear the field, so empty me out, don't care what's in the field, it's not allowed to stay there anymore, so just empty the field and delete it. Or option 3, which is where we get clever, which is this hash. So you decide to hash the field and you just make a field to store it in. So this is where, if you're the person that's doing your duplicate detection, for example, these are the fields you want to start looking at. And it's that easy. One extra thing that's worth noting at this point, which people often ask, is related records as well. So down here at the bottom, what we see is any relationship, and then you can decide what you want to do. So what you could do regarding to contact us forms, for example, which is something we have in this system, is I can unlink my related ones, or I can delete them, or I can do nothing and leave them there. So if there is related bits you want to get rid of, so say email messages, then you can set it to still delete, or you can unlink and start getting quite clever that way. And that is how we handle GDPR erasure.